Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to this week's edition of Humanity versus Insanity, the Crane Report. Well, I left Hull earlier this afternoon in a grey, cloudy skies, came down to the southwest, and it's beautiful sunshine, and the studio is rather warm, so I do apologise if you see me perspiring during the course of the evening. Well, an update on Greg Nikolettos. As some of you may have gathered, we were planning on hosting a special event on Sunday, the 22nd of June, titled Fracked, Tracked and Hacked, at which I was going to be joined by Pippa King, who I shall be speaking to in a few minutes, and, of course, Greg Nikolettos. Greg very much wanted to give his presentation, the presentation that he had prepared to present at AV5 in Daventry a few weeks ago. But as I'm sure most people watching this are aware by now, Greg had a rather unfortunate incident occur in Dubai, where it would seem that he lost some 60 hours, and he still is unable to recall exactly what occurred in Dubai. In fact, all he remembers is meeting a gentleman outside Hungry Jack's in the food court area of Dubai Airport. He remembers that this gentleman got into a conversation with him and shared with him that he worked with Cisco, the telecommunications company, but had a previous life working with the Department of Homeland Security, specializing in microchipping children through vaccinations. Now, what would be the chances of such a random meeting? Well, unfortunately, the alarm bells didn't go off in Greg's head. And for those of you who are familiar with Darren Brown, of course, you can see what is presented to the masses as entertainment. So you can be pretty sure that the security services have access to very similar and probably even more advanced techniques. So, unfortunately, we are left to conject as to what actually occurred in Dubai. What we do know is that Greg's bag was not on his scheduled flight from Dubai to London. Therefore, it's very clear that somebody knew that Greg wasn't going to be on that flight. So he arrived at Daventry some 2.5 days after he was scheduled to arrive. And those of us, of course, who met him at AV5 and knew him from his previous visit to the UK when he presented at AV3, knew immediately that there was something not quite right. Well, unfortunately, there was an incident on the Sunday morning on the golf course which led to Greg being arrested and subsequently sectioned. And as I reported last week, I had attended Greg's tribunal. And at the tribunal, the decision was taken to keep Greg under section, but to be reviewed with a view to him being released once it was determined what the police were going to do with regards to the incident that occurred on the golf course. Well, in the latter part of last week, the police and the Crown Prosecution decided that there would be no further action, which led to the hospital releasing Greg from the section. Greg still very much wanted to give his presentation, and consequently we made arrangements for the event next Sunday. But unfortunately, Greg left the hospital without any medication, and not perhaps realizing the significance of going cold turkey after nearly 4 weeks of psychiatric medication. He had a bit of a relapse. Fortunately, he kept it under control, and the following morning the hospital were good enough to courier his medication down to the hotel where he was staying in London. But it was very clear that the critical element here being Greg's health, that he really needed to get back home, get back to his family, and continue whatever medical attention that he needs back in Brisbane. So last night, Greg called a flight back to Australia. He should have landed by now. So later on this evening, I should be calling his home, and hopefully we'll be speaking with Greg. And hopefully he didn't meet any strangers on his stopovers. So Greg very much wants to come back to the UK. He still wants to present the 3 hours of material that he'd prepared for AV5. So watch this space. So Fracked, Tracked and Hacked will take place, but perhaps a little later in the year. I'm looking right now at probably the first half of September. Now, at Greg's tribunal, there was much debate about Greg's capacity for insight. This being the psychological term for one's ability to review and reflect upon one's own behaviour. And much was made of this on the basis that it would seem that within the psychiatric community, this is a significant determining factor with regard to the determination of one's sanity. Well, look at some events of the last few days. Obviously, the media has been pumping the latest atrocities occurring in Iraq. I will bide my time before I make any comment on that particular issue. Suffice to say that I'm not convinced that all is as it is being presented in the mainstream. But simply at this point to make an observation about an individual that clearly has very little capacity for insight. And of course I refer to none other than the sociopath or socio-psychopath himself, Tony Blair. And of course today in the headlines of the Daily Mail, the slaughter that shames Blair. And inside some discussion about what's going on in Iraq, and General Sir Michael Rose, the former UN commander in Bosnia, analyses Blair's attitude and says Blair's bizarre claims and the reality. You know, the reality is that I think we're pretty much all agreed that Tony Blair is insane, and he should very definitely spend the rest of his life under medical supervision. This guy is an absolute menace to humanity. We all know that. It doesn't take any inquiry to establish that. And by the way, Tony, if you want to take me to court to discuss this, let's do it. Let's bring out some of the situations that you have created over the past 20 years nearly. Certainly since 1997, when you walked into number 10 with that smug smirk on your face. And from that point onwards, you became the devil's own puppet. And of course, one of the reasons that you have been so determined to prevent the Chilcot inquiry from publishing the emails that you exchanged with George W. Bush is quite probably because everybody actually thinks that you were simply Bush's poodle, and I'm sure there is some truth in that. But I think it's also true to say that you yourself are an arch neocon. You must be the most right-wing Labour Party leader that this country has ever seen and probably will ever see. And if anybody wants to see from overseas watching this, take a look at the attitude of the British public towards this socio-psychopath. Just look at any of the news articles that are published with regard to Blair's denial that current events in the Middle East have anything to do with the lies and the deceit that he perpetrated back in 2003. And you will see that the British public have absolutely no regard. They have nothing but contempt for this socio-psychopath. He does not represent the British people, and yet now he's canvassing to be granted the opportunity to lead the EU. And there are no questions that there are those who think that they are the rightful rulers of a planetary fiefdom who would dearly like to see Blair in that role, because they know that he can be guaranteed to perpetrate more bloodshed, that he can be guaranteed to take the EU into Armageddon. So let's hope that humanity prevails. In fact, I know humanity will prevail, and that this socio-psychopath will ultimately end up where he should end up, which is in Strasbourg and in the international courts to face the appropriate justice. Well, no doubt that this socio-psychopath is going to get multiple column inches in the media over the coming weeks, but this will only serve to convince those who still want to give the guy any benefit of any doubt that he has no other place in British history than in a jail cell. Right, rant over, unless Tony Blair raises his head above the parapet in the next week or so. So I'm going to continue the discussion because this is all very much linked. The global agenda is being accelerated from so many angles, and an increasing number of people, fortunately, are waking up to this nightmare that humanity is sleepwalking into. And although 90% of the population may have zero awareness, and they can't be held necessarily accountable for that, because obviously the games of the establishment and the media and the circuses that are put out, not least the one in Brazil right now, do keep the masses dumbed down. But an increasing percentage of the population is engaging. And that percentage of the population is going to be the downfall, going to bring about the downfall of the socio-psychopaths. But of course, they want to keep track of all those who dissent the establishment. Well, you don't have to look too far. You can just come to the Crane Report and you'll see a few dissenters. And of course, it's recently been revealed that the Met Police have maintained a database of potential domestic extremists. Well, as I've said before, I better be on that list, because if I'm not on that list, then I'm obviously not rattling the cages hard enough yet. And tonight I have another cage rattler who, up until very recently, has kept her head below the parapet, and she has done some sterling work from that position. But Pippa King has now decided, and in my opinion rightly so, that the time has come to step up to the plate and make her research much more public. And what is also happening, of course, is that more and more people are now doing the same. And last week we spoke with Steve Hernandez, who's unfortunately not able to join us tonight, but he will be back with us hopefully next week. Plus another outstanding researcher that has taken Pippa's research to another level. But tonight we have back with us Pippa King. So Pippa, are you there?
Hello Ian, good evening.
Now Pippa, I can't hear you.
Right.
Pippa?
Yep.
Maybe it's my connection here. Pippa?
Yep.
Oh, there you go. I think it's a dodgy connection down here.
Okay.
Now, hey, and listen, Pippa, I'm sure you have received some emails. I certainly have, and regular viewers of Humanity versus Insanity are very grateful for you highlighting what has been going on at in schools. And not too surprisingly, in many cases the adolescents that have willingly, or perhaps in some cases not so willingly, participated in this biometrics agenda had not consulted with their parents. And as you have explained, it is beholden upon the schools to share this information with their parents. But it does seem that many schools seem to overlook that particular requirement.
Well, there was a Protection of Freedoms Act in May 2012, and in that Protection of Freedoms Act, a chapter of it in 3 verses were applied to parental consent in schools. So schools do need to now get in touch with parents and get a signature or something in writing from them to say that it's okay for the schools to process their child's biometric information.
So can this be retrospective? So basically anybody watching this who perhaps hasn't had this discussion with their children should broach the subject, and if they do discover that biometrics are being used in their child's school, then they should be asking for confirmation and permission and the appropriate documentation they can sign or not sign.
No, that's right. I mean, for every biometric record a school has on a database, there has to be a corresponding signature by a parent. If the child's left school and it's happened sort of in the last decade, then no, it's not retrospective in that sense. But if the school still has biometric data on its database of a child, then it needs a corresponding parental signature. And that could be in writing, or it could be by email. So schools can actually email parents and get the parents to email back, and that's considered consent as well.
Okay, so there you go. Please, if you are watching this and you haven't had the discussion with your children, and it's time you did so, gently of course. It's not the children's fault they're being asked to give up their biometric data through thumbprints. But if you haven't been consulted, then please do contact the schools and ask what's going on, because they were supposed to ask your permission in the first instance. And of course, you do have every right to deny that permission. Am I correct in that, Pippa?
Absolutely. But within the Protection and Freedoms Act, schools have to give a non-biometric provision like a pin or a card, so those pupils are not discriminated against. So they do have to give a non-biometric option.
Now, I was having a conversation with a parent just a few days ago who went into the schools to have this discussion, and she actually felt that she was being ridiculed. Because the school had been using biometrics for library books and for school dinners for about 3 years. And she was told that she had signed a document giving permission. She stated apparently categorically that she had not, or if she had, it had been contained in such small print that she hadn't noticed it, and it must have been linked in with something else. But she said that she was clearly made to feel very uncomfortable, and also that she was the only one who had questioned the wisdom of this practice.
If I had £1 for every parent that told me that they've been told by a school they were the only one objecting, I'd be a very rich person. This is what the schools do. They tend to isolate the parents and speak to them individually and make them feel like they are the only one. But certainly she can retract any consent she's given. She doesn't, once it's given, it can be taken away. So if she feels that's the case, then she can certainly write to the school or email the school and get them to or take her child's biometrics off the database. But yeah, the schools are very good at making parents feel isolated.
Okay, so we know it's going on. We know the practice is very, very widespread in the UK, much more widespread than most people are aware of. And as we've been discussing over the last few weeks, this is a very deliberate agenda to target the children so that basically as they move into adulthood, the giving up of their biometric data is not questioned. It's just regarded as a normal part of society.
Certainly, it has the effect of softening the children up to using biometric data, certainly in a compliant situation like a school, where the teachers are saying to the kids it's okay to do this. This is why parental decisions sort of, I feel, been taken out of it a little bit, because we don't use biometrics in adult society. In fact, there's just an instance at the moment going on with the union of train workers in London, where they want to biometrically fingerprint their cleaning staff as they go on and off the tube and the railway stations. And there's a big uproar about that, about loss of liberty and privacy. And it's only just now these systems are only sort of just coming into adult society, and there's a mixed feeling about it. But we only have to wait another 15, 20 years, and the children that have been using biometrics for the past decade plus are going to enter as adults into society and be softened to their use. So that's my worry. Is it generates reports, it holds data about you, and of course biometric data can be transferred between databases as well, as we talked about with possible police access to school databases in a previous program.
So you can see how this is all going to be sold as a positive. I mean, obviously it's the equivalent of the biometric clock card. So the corporate slaves have for a long time had to clock in and clock out. A system that I'm sure was occasionally open to abuse. So now they're trying to shut that down with the biometrics. But it is all part of the agenda to effectively totally enslave the person, isn't it? To ensure that they are effectively contributing to the corporate agenda.
I wanted to go back to actually what Steve was saying with his experience of RFID and sort of tie it in with the biometrics and how biometrics will be used to verify you. His daughter in San Antonio, Texas, had been asked to wear an active RFID chip so that she could get tracked around campus to see where she was. And this RFID chip was emitting a frequency of 433 megahertz every 40 seconds, I believe, and it sort of showed her position in the school to within whatever classroom she was in. There's been an instance of a college in the UK that has also been tracking their students with active RFID chips. I just want to explain what the difference is between active and passive RFID. So RFID stands for radio frequency identification. And we probably know RFID chips as the contactless cards that we've got, debit and credit cards in our wallet, and also the Oyster card. So you don't have to physically put your magnetic strip through the reader. You can just wave your card in front of it. And that's got what they call a passive RFID chip in. So when you take your card towards the reader will energize the chip, wake it up, exchange information with the chip, and as you take your card away from the reader, your RFID chip will go back to sleep again. And that's known as a passive RFID. Active RFID is different. Active RFID is battery powered, its circuits are battery powered, and it emits a radio frequency, so in effect you're carrying an antenna.
We've got a picture actually of Andrea's RFID chip, and it is literally, it is a mini transmitter receiver, isn't it? And in fact, it looks like the battery is about the largest part of the circuitry there.
Yeah, the batteries can have quite a long shelf life. The college that was using the RFID in the UK for the past 3 years had a shelf life of 7 years. But it was interesting because when the Protection of Freedoms Bill was signed in May 2012, it wasn't enforceable until September 2013. So schools had an adjustment period to sort of either get an alternative system in or choose whether or not to buy biometric systems. And it was around about that time that I sort of had a little break because I'd done what I'd achieved to do and get a change in the law. But at that time, Andrea was going through what she was going through in San Antonio, getting expelled and having trouble sort of not carrying the RFID chip. And it suddenly occurred to me that maybe the bigger picture wasn't about biometrics. I went back to the Protection of Freedoms Act and I went and read it word for word, although I don't have a legal sort of pair of eyes, but certainly from a layperson's point of view, and I realised with horror that it hadn't sort of accommodated for RFIDs. It only really accommodated for biometric technology. So effectively, I was sort of thinking, my goodness, schools could bring in RFID over here, and either myself or the previous organisations in the UK would have to go through this 7-year or same process we've just been through to get the law changed on biometrics. And Andrea highlighted this. So I was aware of an instance in 2007 where a school in Doncaster called Hunger Hill High School had thought it was a good idea to put RFID chips, sew them into children's blazers to see where they were. I think we touched about that on last week. There was such an outcry sort of from, organisations around the world that the trial was quickly stopped. And as far as I know, there's been no active RFID or tracking systems in UK schools since then, although it's fairly prolific in the States. But I decided to do some searching on the internet just to see if there was a school doing it. And to my horror and interest, there was a 14 to 19-year-old college, West Cheshire College in Cheshire, that had been tagging its students since 2010 with a type of RFID called ultra-wideband. And this ultra-wideband RFID was emitting a frequency every second for 100 metres around each child, which is 324 feet, I believe, and showing that child's position in college within an accuracy of 1 metre. And an article appeared in the RFID journal where the building services manager for the college had actually said, this is great, we can. I think primarily because the college was a new build, there were 2 campuses, Ellesmere Port and West Cheshire College, and the senior management at the college had decided to build this RFID and to sort of make the building green so they could see the occupancy of the rooms and where the students were, and they were always all as well using it for registration purposes. But he openly admitted in this article that they were looking at children in peer groups and looking at their associations, which is horrific because that... Where's the privacy? You've got no privacy. You're being judged by who you're associating with. And of course, the big thing that sprung to mind for me was, what if it's showing them in classrooms? Does it show them in toilets, showers, school nurse? And also, as well, a big safeguarding issue for children is, would it not be really easy to give your tag to a friend, your tag still appear on college, and you go off site? So you've got immediate issues of it's not, I don't think, very good enough for an awful lot of reasons. So I started to send the college some freedom of information requests about well, consent was my main issue, because if I was a parent and somebody had said to me, we're going to put an RFID tag on your kid that's emitting every second, 24 hours a day, he's going to bring it home and bring it into your house, and it's still going to emit the frequency, and we can track his every move to the, positioning within a meter in the college, I'd have something to say about that, and I wouldn't agree. And it struck me as strange that this article, they've been tagging the kids since 2010, and not one parent had objected. With the biometrics, there was always somebody that didn't object, and yet it had been 2 years, and no parent had objected, and no child had objected. So I gave the college a number of freedom of information requests, and primarily asked about consent. And all the college could say was, students were informed at enrolment, and that was it. There was no written consent, no communication with parents. I wanted the college to acknowledge what it was they were wearing, the type of technology, because the RFID journal had detailed it very nicely. The college simply said, we don't know what they're wearing, it's just an RFID tag, and it is for registration and building management. So the lack of information the college had was quite stunning, I have to say. It surprised me, having dealt with schools and biometrics since 2005. It was just jaw-dropping, the lack of information.
I think we've got a picture of the RFID chip that they were wearing. I think if we can bring this on the screen, there we go. I think, is that the RFID that they were wearing at Cheshire?
Yes, that was encased in a plastic casing, and that measures about 3 centimetres by 6 centimetres. And you can clearly see there's some other things going on there other than just an active RFID chip. I feel I don't know. I'm not a computer expert, so I couldn't say what those black boxes are on there. But that to me looks like a small motherboard rather than just an RFID tag.
Well, and if this article that you sent through to me is anything to go by, this is from the US, an RFID scheme in the US where there was a 4-mile range of the RFID chip, which of course opens up a whole plethora of opportunity for those who are interested in tracking the whereabouts of the population.
Definitely. I mean, this is my website. I set this up after I found out that West Cheshire College were using RFID in schools, because actually, sort of thinking about the logistics of it all, if you're running a school of, say, 5,000 plus students, which West Cheshire College are, biometric technology is great because it gives you where one person is at one point in time. RFID is better because it gives you where everybody is at every point in time. And it did occur to me that maybe the wording of the Protection and Freedoms Act bill could have been done better with that in hindsight. So my main goal now is to get the word of that Protection and Freedoms Act changed so it encompasses RFID as well. But I don't think it's even an issue for consent. I mean, I would have neither technologies in school, biometrics or RFID. RFID is slightly different because if your child doesn't agree to be tagged, it will be sat next to another child who is being tagged and still bathing, sharing in the same radio frequency.
Well, you sent me this graphic as well, which again was based on the Cheshire experiment, and looking at the potential impact of young people, the students living in a particular area. Obviously, they're carrying these active RFID chips 24/7. I mean, a few weeks ago we were talking to Mike Mitchum of Stop Smart Meters. And he was talking about the significant impact and the negative health impacts, the proven negative health impacts of smart meters when they've been installed in the US and in Australia and in Canada, and the problems that can be associated with having these active Wi-Fi devices on your house, and in fact on every other house in the street, and in particular in apartment blocks. And now we're magnifying the issue, we're exacerbating the issue potentially with every young person in the area, and we know this is just the start of every young person in an area having an active RFID chip as well. So I mean, you are literally living in a Wi-Fi bath.
Well, this was really interesting because the frequency was 6.35 to 6.75 gigahertz. To give you an indication, most of our routers are at 2.4 gigahertz, and in the UK, I think we can go up to 5 gigahertz. So these tags were emitting a frequency a little bit higher than what our Wi-Fi routers emit. I'm no technician, so I couldn't say whether or not the effects are as harmful as Wi-Fi. All I can say is from personal experience, I've not yet to read a scientific report that says that bathing in those frequencies is good for us. So I decided, because there were 5,500 of these tags, to see what sort of impact that frequency would have on the rest of the population. And I think it turned out there was 250 odd people that could potentially be affected. And I went by the average house size of 2.2 persons per house in the UK, and there were 5,500 of these. And I calculated that about 1.2 million people potentially could be affected by the frequency and the tags that the students were wearing. But there would have been a concentration of students within 100 metres of each other, I guess, sort of living. But the students came from Liverpool, Chester, North Wales. Those tags went far and wide. And I'm sure the implications of this maybe weren't thought of by the college at the time, and maybe why would they? As far as I know, there's no specific absorption rate for this type of RFID. I sent the Ofcom a freedom of information request to see if there was one, and they haven't got one, and I've not been able to find any specific absorption rate, and that's the rate at which the human body takes hold of radio frequencies and sort of keeps them there. So it's an unknown technology. And this is another thing that really concerned me about the RFID at West Cheshire College. The college started using it in the West Cheshire campus, apparently according to the RFID Journal, in September 2010. They then, when Ellesmere Port campus opened in September 2012, the children there started wearing it then. In February 2012, the IEEE, which is the Institute, I'm going to get this right now, of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, were working on this particular RFID as a standard because it hadn't been standardized in the industry. And so the kids were wearing this sort of unstandardized RFID. The supplier, Zebra Technologies, who supplied the college with the RFID chips, were working on the panel of the IEEE to standardize it. And as soon as, in February 2012, when it was standardized, it's been given an 802.154F standardization, which I think sort of brings it in line with current Wi-Fi and other frequencies. The RFID Journal then ran their article a couple of months later in April to say how fantastic it was, and the college was saying what a return on investment it was. And it suddenly occurred to me that actually these kids have been wearing something that really hadn't been, I guess, tested, I think, for want of a better word. Yeah. And suddenly, now that it was all tested, it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And the college actually sent one of its members of staff over to Florida, Orlando, to speak at an international RFID conference on how great this technology was. And so when I picked it up in the sort of October of that year and started asking the college freedom of information request, after my second freedom of information request, the college wrote back to me and said, "Oh, you're asking too many questions. We're not going to answer any more questions." So I wrote back to them and just said, "That's not an exemption under the law. You've got to answer these questions." And I was only asking what the consent was, how long the kids had been wearing this RFID, just to clarify that the RFID Journal had got it correct. And I asked how much it was, whether it was, whether the tag stopped transmitting off school premises and questions like that. I mean, you can see all the freedom of information requests I've sent at a website called whatdotheyknow.com. Just type in Pippa King and you'll see an awful lot of text on those freedom of information requests. But in the end, I had to get the Information Commissioner involved, and the Information Commissioner oversees the Freedom of Information Act and the Data Protection Act and another Environmental Information Regulations Act. But if you're not getting any answers from the people, the public authority or body that you're asking, that office will then try and sort it out. So I did complain to the Information Commissioner's office, and around about the same time, the RFID Journal pulled the article from their website. Zebra Technologies, who had done a press release in March 2012, about the technology, pulled that from their website.
So hang on a second. Let me get this right. Okay. You as far as you know, are the only person asking these questions, and basically these companies pull the data from their websites.
Yes.
So in other words, they obviously had a meeting, because that wasn't a unilateral decision by some individual in the organisation. They had a meeting, and when they actually sat down and reviewed your questions, they realised they had a problem.
It's looking like that might have been the case. I actually personally don't think that they understood that the college hadn't asked for consent, and that these children were being tagged covertly. And I think that was probably what happened. But there was also the promotional video that you showed at the end of the first program we did. That was pulled from the internet, and I had to actually. The only way I could take that from the supplier's website was to actually film it myself, because they'd sort of got it so embedded in there. And I'm glad that I have. And I actually saved all the articles from the RFID Journal and Zebra Technologies press release. The only place you can now find a history of what's happened with this ultra-wideband is on my website, rfidinschools.com. There's a tag there, West Cheshire College, and some links, and you can see the promotional video and read the articles that have been withdrawn from the internet.
So the critical element here is that primarily, for the best part of a decade, you have been almost the sole campaigner on this particular issue in the UK. And what you've achieved in flagging up this agenda and getting it shut down to date is nothing short of miraculous. And, you know, as we discussed last week with Steve and his daughter Andrea, you know, what they have achieved by standing up to the San Antonio school district is also nothing short of remarkable. Now, I know Steve's got a lot more to share with us, and he's going to talk about all the harassment and everything else that he has had to, he and the family have had to endure. I don't think you've had quite the same level of, shall I say, personal attention.
No, I've when we were campaigning for the biometrics, I was sort of on a pecking order of a list of 1 to 5. Number 5, if anybody was a radio interview or television interview, I didn't want to be anywhere near it. I'm actually quite a private person. I just, you know, I did a lot of research. I did a lot of things. Apart from my blog on the biometrics, I just kept my face out of it. In fact, if you Google me, I think you'll find one photograph of me on the internet, and that was from a gardening event that I organised a few years ago. But I really have I've made a decision now to sort of speak about it, because consistently I've had other people, great people that have helped me, and other parents and privacy organisations, but I'm the one that's consistently been at this since 2005, so I've got the sort of timeline in my head and experience to sort of go out and, I suppose, deal with West Cheshire College and challenge what they're doing. But interestingly, one of the, just going back to the Information Commissioner's intervention, the college had refused to answer a whole load of the questions, and actually cited me under the Freedom of Information Act as being vexatious, which is a reason why they don't have to answer any more of my request. And the Information Commissioner ruled that I wasn't vexatious, and that the college had to answer the requests. And it turned out the official trial of the RFID ran from September 2012 to February 2013, and actually it didn't work, so they switched it off. And less than a month later, the principal left, retired. And one of the questions the college didn't want to answer me was how much it cost. And my jaw dropped as I added up the figures that they listed for the different components of the system, and it came to £1,050,242 ex-VAT, and that's our taxpayers' money that essentially paid for a scheme that ran for less than 6 months trial, and they switched off because it didn't work. Now, this RFID is used by military and big industry. This works absolutely fine, but then the kids were wearing it, according to the RFID Journal, from 2010. So why they only conducted a trial in the last, or an official trial in the last 5 months of the RFID being operational is anybody's guess. There's a lot of inconsistencies. I have one document from the school that explains the RFID and how it was brought in. And that is it. They have no other documentation whatsoever. It's stunning incompetence. Tom Watson MP has asked 6 questions in the House of Commons, written questions, the Department of Education, who, true to form, answered in the same style that they answered questions on the biometrics, was that schools are their own authority, they can spend their budgets on what they want. I'd also use the Freedom of Information Act to ask the Department of Education about what they knew about RFID in schools. They said they knew nothing, but the department that might know would be the Department of Business Innovation in Schools. So I sent a Freedom of Information request to them and said, what do you know about RFID in schools? They said, we know nothing, but the Department of Culture, Media and Sport might know. I thought, why would they know about RFID? And it turns out that particular government department oversees Ofcom. And Ofcom, again, had no idea about RFID in schools, and neither did the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. So we've got to the point where we've got an unregulated, sophisticated, highly sophisticated tracking surveillance technology coming into schools, completely under everybody's radar. I guess my personal reason for doing this and keeping at it is it just feels horrendously sorry for the children. I mean, I don't think they even fully understood or even knew that people were looking at who they were hanging out with and what groups they were attending, whether they were in the shower or the toilet or whether they were visiting a school nurse. I mean, that's, in my head, the mentality of the people that think that's a good idea to do that to a child is beyond my capacity to understand.
And that's not even before we get on to the issues of the potential negative health impacts. I mean, one of the things that Mike Mitchum shared with us, of course, was the effect of carrying a mobile phone in your pocket for a few hours and the effect it had on the male sperm count. And we saw, obviously, the brain scan pictures of people who had been using their cell phone excessively. And yet here we are talking about youths, and we know that the undeveloped physiology is much more susceptible than the adult physiology, and yet we're making them effectively wear these active RFID chips 24/7 near us, damn it, because I'm sure when they took them off at night, they just stick them on the bedside table. And, you know, as we've discussed before, turning your phone off at night or putting your phone on flight mode is absolutely crucial to your long-term well-being, and yet there's no way of switching these things off.
No, that's right. The kids had no control over the tag and when it was on or off. The only people that had that control were the college, because I asked them, and they said, no, we can switch it on and off. But they weren't doing. They were just pulsing every second to 300 meters around them. I mean, Mike is very much more up on me on the health implications of RF, but more than anything else, I'm concerned about if the kids did know if they were being tracked, how would that affect their behaviour? How would it affect who they hang around with, how they exercise their religious freedoms, how they exercise their political freedoms? And also, you know, you've got an unquantifiable situation where you maybe could have a child that was really depressed and wanted to go for advice but didn't. I mean, this is worst case scenario, but then harmed themselves as a result of not thinking they could go to a school nurse and nobody else peer at it, and not least knowing who's peering at it. And this type of technology needs, well, in my eyes, it needs no debate, because it shouldn't be anywhere near schools or humans, but for tracking purposes. But if it's going to be used, I mean, there's so many issues to talk about, but you know, it's just completely inappropriate, and we don't know enough about these sort of technologies to know what effect it has psychologically and physically on people that are wearing them and being tracked.
Okay, Pippa, we're coming to the very end once again of tonight's show, and let me just reiterate, Pippa has been pretty much on point on this on her own for the best part of a decade. This is something that is potentially going to impact on the next generation. It's beholden upon all of us to ascertain what is going on in the schools and to ask the questions, and not just roll over and accept the school authority. You know, The vast majority of the population may be still dumbed down, but regular viewers of this program definitely are not. So Pippa, where can people go to get more information on your work?
I've got two websites. The biometric website is www.pippaking.blogspot.co.uk, and the Against RFID in Schools is rfidinschools.com, and you should be able to find both sites easily.
Okay, Pippa, thank you so much for sharing with us again tonight. I am sorry that we've had to postpone the event next Sunday, Tracked and Hacked, but it will take place later this year, and we will be exposing even more about this total control agenda. Meanwhile, join me in 45 minutes on Fracking Nightmare.